Good morning, everyone. Today is Shushan Purim, which means that in Jerusalem, today is the day they're celebrating Purim. And they're reading the Megilah in Jerusalem today. And in the Megilah, we see the contrast between Mordechai and Haman. And we see how no individual is raised in a vacuum. Every person has a family and friends that they are nurtured by. And that could make all the difference. You see, Esther, the niece of Mordechai, was an orphan. Her father died when her mother was pregnant, and then her mother died when she was born. But she had a loving uncle who adopted her and raised her. And when she was taken to the palace to marry King Achashverosh, the Megilah says that every single day, B'chol yom v'yom, Mordechai would go to the gates of the palace to inquire to the welfare to see how his niece was doing. He was a doting and loving uncle. On the other hand, Haman was surrounded with a wicked family. His 10 sons were hanged because they were his henchmen, his supporters, his encouragers. And a matter of fact, at one point in the story, Haman comes home and tells his wife that despite all the honor and the fame that I have, and that the king invited me exclusively to the party with Esther, every time I see that Jew, Mordechai, who won't bow down to me, I feel like nothing in my life is worthwhile. And it's his wife and his friends, his beloved friends and his wife say, you know what? Build a gallows 50 cubits high and go to the king and tell him to hang Mordechai on that gallows. And sure enough, he goes, but instead of Mordechai ultimately being hanged, he's hanged on the very gallows that his wife and his friends tell him to build. And it shows you that we are all influenced. If we have a supportive, loving, positive family that guides us on the right path, we could be Queen Esther who saves the Jews. And if not, if we have a wife like Zeresh and children like the 10 sons of Haman and friends that tell you to go hang a Jew, then you get hanged on that gallows yourself. And that's why at the end of the Megilah, the closing verse says, Mordechai became prime minister of Persia. But his greater accomplishment, goes on to say, was that he was beloved by his nation. And he sought the welfare of his people. And then the closing words is, V'dover shalom l'chol zaro. He sought the good and the protection and the welfare of all of his children and descendants. And what the Megilah is teaching us is that to be a Jewish hero doesn't mean that you become a prime minister, that you become famous. What it means is that you're a good Jew, that you care about your fellow Jews, that you care about your family. Ultimately, that is the test. There are many great leaders in history who their children wouldn't talk to them. They were heroes to the world, but not to their own family. And the closing message of the Megilah is that it's all about your family. As someone once said, the letters Family stand for Father and Mother, I love you. It's the love that starts with the father and mother and trickles down to the whole family. The unity of the Jewish nation and the unity of the family. There's a story about this rabbi who was a Chabad rabbi at UCLA. And it was Purim. So he's in UCLA in Los Angeles and he's going around reading the Megilah. As he's walking through the campus, he sees a professor, a Jewish professor. He says, can I read the Megilah for you? This professor was very secular, had never heard the Megillah, so he said, okay, you could say the blessing. He thought it was a short blessing. He starts rolling out the long Megillah. He says, how long does this take? He says, about 20, 30 minutes. He says, I don't have 20, 30 minutes. I thought it was a minute or two. I have to get to an appointment in Irving, California. I got to leave. I'm sorry. And this rabbi, whose name was Rabbi Shlomo Schwartz, says, you're going to Irving, California? Irving? I also have to go to Irvine. Can I get a ride with you? He says, sure. Gets in his car. As they get on the freeway, Rabbi Schwartz says to this professor, listen, we're already sitting in the car for an hour's drive. Why don't I read the Megilah right now? And he says, sure, go ahead. So they read the Megilah. When they get to Irvine, California, he says, where do you want me to drop you off? He says, take me to the bus stop. He says, Rabbi, I don't mind taking you where you need to go. He says, well, I'll tell you the truth. I really don't have to go to Irvine. I just wanted to read the Megilah for you. So I said I need to go to Irvine because I needed to read the Megilah for you. But now I'm going to take a bus back to Los Angeles where I live. The professor couldn't believe this rabbi who drove an hour each way just to read the Megilah for him. Anyways, Rabbi Schwartz, Shlomo Schwartz, passed away in 2017. A year later, a young religious man walks into his son, Rabbi Moshe Schwartz's Chabad house in Boston. And he starts talking to me. He says, "What's your name?" He says, "My name is Rabbi Schwartz." He says, "Was Rabbi Shlomo Schwartz related to you?" He says, "That was my father." He says, "Really?" He says, "I want you to know I'm religious today because of your father." He says, "Really? You met my father?" He says, "No, I never met your father." He said, "How are you religious because of my father?" He says, "Let me tell you a story. When I was a teenager, I got involved in Judaism. I grew up in a secular home, but I started learning Torah. And then in college, I deepened my knowledge through my Chabad rabbi. And then I came home one day and told my parents I want to take a year off from school and go learn Torah in Jerusalem. My parents said, "No way. You're not going off to learn Torah in Jerusalem. You got to finish your college degree." And we got into a big argument about it. So finally, my parents said, "You know what? Let's go talk to Grandpa. Grandpa's very wise. Let's get his advice." So the family went to Grandpa, and we both presented our sides. And my grandpa said to me, "Tell me, which school do you want to go to in Jerusalem?" He said, I want to go to a Chabad school." He says, "If you're going to Chabad school, I'll give you my full blessings." He says, "Full blessings? That's great." The father turns to his father. He says, "How could you say that, Grandpa? You believe in education. How could you tell me he could go learn in yeshiva?" And the father proceeds to say, "Let me tell you a story. When I was a professor at UCLA," and he proceeds to tell the story about the Chabad rabbi who took a lift with him to Irvine just to read the Megilah. And he said to his son, "If my grandson wants to go to a yeshiva, a school, that is going to teach them such selfless love for the Jewish people, for your fellow Jew, such devotion, such care, I couldn't be prouder than him going to learn in such a yeshiva." And with my grandfather's blessing, he said, "I went to learn in Jerusalem, and that's why I am an observant Jew today." The most important thing to remember at the end of the Megillah is that as Jews, our first responsibility is to be concerned for the welfare of the Jewish people, for our fellow man, and for our families, because by building beautiful, strong families and a strong Jewish community, that's the way we fulfill our ultimate mission, which is to be a light unto the nations. Have a wonderful Shushan Purim.